I'm gonna start recording now, and I'll do a little share screen here. Okay, this is our program. We got a lot of loaded stuff, great speakers. Each and every one of us could probably talk for about 2 hours straight, but we're gonna be limited, keep it concise, and we're gonna really roll through this whole thing. But first, I would like to start off every one of our events. We start off with a moment of silence. Let's bow our heads and think of those who are not with us today, especially those that left the Philippines, who came to America to put a roof over our heads, food in our stomach, denied us opportunities that were denied to them. Thank you. And we're going to start off with Auntie Dorothy. She'll do the opening. So you got it there, Auntie Dorothy.
Yeah. Thank you for tuning in to this important number 3 version of FANHS National Filipino American History 101. And this is called Conversations on Issues which Affected Filipino American Voting Patterns from the 1960s to the present. And there will be 4 separate groups. The first group are those of us who fought for civil rights, the second people who actually became elected officials. The third part are young people who are expressing their opinions. And then we are inviting people to speak during the last section if we have time. So feel free, if you have things to say during this time, keep it until the very end. Thank you.
All right, Auntie Dorothy, you didn't even need the stopwatch on it. We're off. Panel number 1, I'm going to hand it over to a great friend of mine, Uncle Sonny. Go ahead, Uncle. You got it. Sonny, that's you.
I'm Andres Tangalan. They call me Sonny. There is a proverb: you don't know what you have until it's gone. The 3 decades of the civil rights movement established many of the freedoms and rights that this generation enjoys today. Legal protections against discrimination, educational opportunities, social justice movements, cultural impact of music, arts, and literature, political engagement. During the 1960s and 80s, many minorities were earning a working class income with restricted avenues to better their lives. Trade unions would not accept minority apprenticeships. Housing was segregated. Governance policies were managed by European colonial values of manifest destiny. Police were 100% white officers. Many segregated schools lacked educational offerings and were overcrowded. Blacks and Filipino Americans groveled and negotiated access to opportunities to improve their lives. The demand for change resulted in adapting more militant strategies: sit-ins, anti-Vietnam War rallies, open housing and equal employment campaigns, educational boycotts, desegregation lawsuits. Minority construction workers challenged trade union discrimination practices and the lockout for competing for building contracts. The songs, A Change Is Gonna Come by Sam Cooke, Blowing in the Wind by Bob Dylan, What's Going On by Marvin Gaye, Respect by Aretha Franklin, were calls for action, peace, and love. Filipino-Alaska-Canada Union and their segregated working conditions were challenged by Filipino American activists for corrupt practices. College campuses were confronted with the demands for admissions in undergraduate, graduate, professional programs, ethnic studies, and professorships. The Philippine-derived KDP would organize nationally to support social justice issues in the Philippines and the United States. And there were other initiatives that produced results. In the 1970s, I co-chaired, along with another Filipina, Lois Hayasaka, the Coalition Against Discrimination. The coalition represented 37 human relations, civil rights, religious, and minority organizations representing over 125,000 individuals. We successfully conducted a 2-year statewide campaign to deny liquor discounts in Washington state to racially discriminatory social clubs like the Elks, Eagles, and Moose Lodges. During this time, some of us activists were called Young Turks by our manongs, or Filipino elders. This characterization had its origins in the Ottoman Empire. The 600-year-old Ottoman Empire was transformed by a coalition of young revolutionaries called Young Turks, that culminating in forming a constitutional government. The Young Turks in Seattle were a small group of local Filipino Americans who were catalysts protesting for social change. Their activism followed individual and cohort pathways. They shared common behaviors, an urgency toward action, coalesced in solidarity, at times commanded, and self-identified as Filipino Americans. These Filipino American personalities cut their teeth in leadership roles, building network relationships, creating strategic initiatives, advocating for educational equity, and engaging in political tumult. This mindset, conviction, and behaviors were core traits of the Seattle Filipino American Young Turks. The Young Turk moniker evoked a cool brand identity. Throughout today's program, you will witness Filipino Americans whose social influence and beliefs were motivational in making Filipino American civic and community contributions. The panels will address the question, what would you want to be remembered from your participation in the fight for social justice for Filipino Americans, and why? We begin with Juanita Tamayo Lot.
Juanita, you're muted. You need to unmute.
Thank you, Arnell. Thank you, Sunny. We all know that Filipino Americans have a long history of civic engagement, ranging from leading social movements such as the Delano Grape Strike, to serving in the armed forces, mainly in the Navy, to increasing voter registration of naturalized citizens. Filipino naturalized citizens have a very high rate of voter registration, to being a civil servant, and to running for public office. My hope is that my brief presentation will motivate you to be an active U.S. citizen. The most basic duty and privilege of citizenship is to vote at local, state, and federal levels every election period. I'll share 2 examples of my civic engagement. First is the 1968-1969 student strike at San Francisco State, and second is the federal recognition of the Filipino American population. And there are 3 references that are in the chat that relate to this discussion. First is the documentary film Agents of Change, where I'm the only Asian American involved in there. The second one is my 2018 book, Golden Children, Legacy of Ethnic Studies, San Francisco State. And then on October 10th, 2018, article in Positively Filipino called PACE, a critical link in Filipino American history. I was an active member of the student organization PACE, the Filipino American Collegiate Endeavor, and the Third World Liberation Front. Many of us at PACE were children of the Manong and Manong generation. We were citizens of the US, and we fought for greater representation in higher education as students, staff, and faculty, and for School of Ethnic Studies. PACE members were part of the leadership of the Black Student Union Third World Liberation Front Central Committee. The strike at San Francisco State is the longest student-led strike in US history, when going from November 6, 1968 to March 22, 1969. Two strike demands, among others, were met: expanded college access for people of color and the creation of the first College of Ethnic Studies in the nation. Not only did we go on the strike line day in and day out, regardless of the weather, but we were willing to lose college credit, to lose a semester of college. Faculty, staff, and students were willing to lose their jobs. We knew that we could be jailed, and many of us were. At the same time, we had to develop the curriculum of ethnic studies, pace work with other student organizations in California, and gain support from the Filipino community, the business folks, and the educators in the Bay Area. So our collective sacrifice was able to expand the enrollment of people of color in higher education, undergrad, graduate school, and subsequently into the professions. Furthermore, San Francisco State experiences became the catalyst for other colleges and universities across the nations to protest, to advocate, and to fight for equitable representation in academia and to establish ethnic studies, not just in higher education, but also at the elementary and secondary levels. My second civic engagement is my involvement with the U.S. Census Bureau as a private citizen, a consultant, and a career civil servant. There are two foundational systems of the United States. One is the legal system, and the second is the statistical system, of which the Census Bureau is the linchpin. The decennial census counts the U.S. population. If you aren't counted, you don't exist. If you aren't counted, you don't exist.
1 minute.
And also the decennial census is also used to draw the lines of legislative districts and reapportion the seats for each state that they hold in Congress. And so the federal recognition of Filipinos in America began with early 1900s when there were the migration of pensionados and sailors, and they were there counted as nationals or aliens. Only with the 1952 McCarran-Warren Immigration and Naturalization Act were we allowed to have naturalized citizenship. But we know that those who had served the U.S. Armed Forces could become citizens earlier than that. But then in 1965, as you all know, the Immigration Act, Hart-Celler Act, abolished immigration quotas for non-European countries. And the other related 1965 very important act was the Civil Rights Act of the Voting Rights Act, one person, one vote.
Time, Juanita.
Okay. So I was able to work with the federal government to make sure that we always had Filipinos counted for all the federal programs. And so my 1 minute is, 2.7 billion of 4 million Filipinos Americans are eligible to vote. We are relatively recent voters. Every vote matters. I want you to remember, this is important. In the 2000 presidential election, only 500 votes separated George Bush and Al Gore. So the most basic duty and privilege of citizenship is to vote at local, state, and federal levels every election period. And the really critical thing that we have to look at is people are trying to get rid of citizenship by birth to be taken away for certain groups. So please vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Juanita.
What happened there, and Alan?
Sunny?
That's you, Sonny.
Oh, Mel's next.
Okay. Thank you. Andre, let's see. Arnell, can you put on that first slide, please?
Sure. 1 sec.
What I'd like to do is focus my 5 minutes on a project that really changed the landscape of stock in California. One was the Crosstown Freeway, which was close to 4 miles long and is 1 block wide, and the development and completion of the Filipino Center you can see on that map. I'll talk about some of the iconic people that made it happen. I was a part of that in the background, but I did serve over 40 years on that board of directors as a board member. So I'll be a little bit specific with a few of the individuals that I thought were really major contributors, and we'll go from there. If I can have the next slide, please.
One second.
The Crosstown Freeway incidentally impacted residential. It impacted recreational, the businesses that were not only Filipino, but Asian, Hispanic, African American. They were all impacted. The picture here, the second picture, is a picture of Ted Lapousse, who was the first president of the board of directors at the Filipino Center. And the two individuals next to him are Lorena Cabanero on your left, and on the right is Lillian Galito. These two individuals back in the early 70s were students at UC Davis, and they were part of a research project that was sponsored by UC Davis under the leadership of Professor Fujimoto. And there were actually 4 students that were assigned to this project. It was called the Roadblocks to Community Building. And this particular study that they did took probably over a year or a year and a half, took more than a semester, maybe a couple semesters. But the end product was this document that they're holding. And this document was really the foundation or the justification for actually getting HUD to approve the loan. If I can have my second or third thank you. And this picture here literally just shows the signing event. It was one of the cover letters of the newsletters the Stockton chapter put out, but it documents local history, and that's what the chapter is supposed to be doing is really documenting our local history. And the Stockton chapter put out a newsletter that covered a lot of that activity. But what you see there are a few of the organizers. You have Jose Bernardo standing up, and other board members and members who were affiliated with this whole project. Jose Bernardo took a lead because he had a background in construction. And if you look at the 10-story high-rise of the Filipino Center, Jose Bernardo had the technical background to work with FHA and HUD. And Jose worked with Ted Lapousse on that previous slide to coordinate with community individuals and organizations to really get the project going.
1 minute.
Could I have a fourth slide, please? Fourth slide really shows just a generic picture of the Barrio Fiestas. The Barrio Fiestas represent the annual anniversary date of the building of the Filipino Center. And it really was a mechanism to bring the Filipino community together. And they really brought the Filipino community together. And if I can have the last slide, please. The last slide shows my retirement from the board after 40 years. I was fortunate enough to see the $2.8 million HUD project get paid off in 40 years as a board member. And that's Jose Bernardo, the person who really took the lead on the Filipino Center. Thank you.
Thank you,
Luna,
Mel.
Luna, you're muted.
Who's supposed to be speaking?
Okay, I'm unmuted now. So am I on now?
Yes, you are.
You're on.
Okay. Well, I'm Luna Jamero. I'm speaking from the heart of Central California here in Livingston. And recalling my grassroots involvement, especially over a span of, over 55 to 60 years, trying to think of all the different highlights of what that meant and what I want to be remembered by. And of course, a lot of that was basically just speaking out and standing up against so many of the social injustices that were happening during this period of time, talking about the 60s and the 70s. I grew up in a rural farming community, and of course, my mother was, and my father, they were operators of a Filipino labor camp. So I went from a very rural existence and then moved to Stockton when I took my first job as a social worker with the county welfare department. So I suddenly found myself, part of the establishment. I was in the middle of a Stockton community that had just torn down all of what I remembered as being Little Manila. The downtown Stockton area was totally razed because of the crosstown freeway, which Mel already spoke on. And when I moved to Stockton, that was really an awareness, a really awakening of my involvement. And I soon found myself in a coalition of other like-minded Filipinos like Jose Bernardo, Morris Arteaga, Lillian Galedo, Lorena, and so many others, and especially the elder community that were always there to support us in our events. But one of the things that I remember very vividly was when Jose Bernardo was working with getting the funding for the Filipino Center. And when he did get that, they started the construction. And I remember he took me up to the very top of the Filipino Center, and we looked down on what used to be downtown Stockton. And it was just a total epiphany for me to begin to see things from above, to see what could be. And I think that that vision always followed me. And of course, Jose was always, one of my cherished mentors in the past. But in terms of the kinds of things that I got involved in. I was involved, of course, in the anti-poverty agency. I was the president of the board, and also I worked on the staff side as well. And we established programs getting and targeting a lot of the displaced Filipinos, especially the elderly Filipinos who were still isolated in some of the downtown hotels that really didn't know what services were out there. So we had a program, and um, we had a neighborhood youth corps of Filipino kids that we supervised, and we took them out, and they went actually into the hotels and found a lot of elderly Filipinos, Manongs, that really needed our help. And not only was it a good thing for the Manongs, but it was also an awareness for the Filipino youth that really didn't know anything about the plight of our Manongs, nor did they know that on their backs, so go we. We would not have been here without them. So that was one of the highlights. Another big thing I found too was that in looking around the Stockton, especially in the Stockton politics or anywhere nationally, we as Filipinos were not visible. And when Jose Bernardo decided to throw his hat in to run against the incumbent, I remember that
1 minute,
incumbent
Luna.
being Carmen Perino, and he ran for he was incumbent for several years. So we ran a grassroots campaign movement, came in within about 200 votes of beating him. And so, that was one of the lessons learned back then of how you can can work together as a group. And also, I know there isn't a lot of time, but each and every one of us, we always think, have we really made a difference? But some guy that I ran into, and he's now in his 60s, but was one of the kids I brought to the 1971 conference. He said that was a pivotal time in his life. Had we not been there to carry the torch and then pass the torch on to the younger generation. Now he was saying that yes, we all made a difference, and so that was enlightening, and I really thank the organizers for putting this together. I know it's a very brief time, but everyone, please don't forget to vote on November 5th. It is, it's very high stakes for everyone. So please vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lily.
Ray Pasquale.
Ray.
Ray, you're muted.
Most of everybody, Ray Pasqua speaking from Puyallup, Washington. I welcome everybody, and I'm just really going to go straight to the people that influenced me and that period of the late 60s and early 70s that I went through. I want to mention three very important people that have had great formulation in my development. One is Dorothy Cordova. The second was Roy Baldos, a legendary person from the Yakima Valley. And the third was Lariat Leong, who was a colleague and mentor. Anyway, I was raised in the Yakima Valley, and there in the Yakima Valley is a famous Filipino American community that was built with the help of the Yakima Indian Nation. People started going there in the 1918s, our monongs did, and I grew up in that very enclosed but very nurturing Filipino community. I went to college at Bellingham, Western Washington University, and those were the days when we had, I believe, we challenged the institution, but we had to have people who were in the system who listened to us. So Western Washington University created a College of Ethnic Studies in 1969. I was accepted into it. And my formative experiences at Western really involved working initially with American Indian students. And so I went to Alcatraz, was on Alcatraz for a little while with Northwest American Indian people. I also was in the demonstrations for the overtake of Fort Lawton, and it became Daybreak Star Center for the Yakima, for the Indians in the Pacific Northwest. In 1969, I became a intern with the College of the Office of Equal Opportunity in Olympia. Through that experience, I was able to reintroduce Lariat Leong back to the Pacific Northwest. I stayed with the Leong family in the winter of 1970. And through that experience, I was able to bring Larry to Western Washington and to Seattle to reintroduce him to the activists in Washington State. In the next 2 years, I was involved with the Farm Workers Union. I went down to Bakersfield and to Lamont, California. Larry helped me set up there, and I was responsible for the Gemara grape fields down in Lamont, California, making sure that the workers that they had on there were unionized workers. I stayed with the Andy Imutan family, he was a vice president of the Farm Workers Union. There were four very powerful Filipino American leaders of the union, and I worked with all of them, and I participated in the the March to Sacramento, and also participated in the defeat of a anti-labor law that was passed by the Oregon legislature.
1 minute, Ray.
Okay. I would say that my days at Western and in those activist days of ethnic studies and civil rights and the anti-war effort helped develop my well-being for the future. I served as president of the Filipino American community in the Yakima Valley for 25 years. We are on the verge of celebrating the placement of the Filipino Hall there on the National Register of Historical Places. The Department of Interior passed that designation in December of 2023. My advice to students is take advantage of all of that, what your colleges can give you, but also challenge the structure so that you get what you want and use that in your future. Thank you.
Dorothy Cordova.
Is it my turn? Okay.
Yeah.
Born in Seattle, 1932, I often experienced racial discrimination as a child, in college, and later as a young wife and mother. During the Great Depression, my family moved to a poor section of Madison Valley. At first, the neighbors wouldn't let their children play with my brothers and me. A few years later, another neighbor called the police and in the street accused my family of stealing and eating his dog. This time, the neighbors were our allies and defended us. The problem ended when you all heard the dog barking in the man's basement. I was 8 years old and was humiliated and angry and felt a deep sense of inferiority. I didn't understand the reason for the accusation until my husband Fred was assigned to research and write about the 75th anniversary of the 1909 Alaska-Yukon Pacific Exposition, which was held on the new University of Washington campus. Iguarote Village was the most popular venue. Publicity proclaimed tenants were headhunters and dog eaters from the Philippines. Those incidents and others in my early years conditioned why I became later such an angry, persistent person during my civil rights days. The 60s and 70s were difficult times, and the ongoing battle for civil rights, affirmative action, open housing, rights against discrimination and inequality, and the upheaval of old social norms. There were also protests against an unpopular Vietnam law when many of our young men were coming home in body bags. An emerging feminist movement was also coming at this time. Into this situation came an increasing number of Asian immigrants who would face a pushback from an American society not prepared or willing to accept them. The 1965 immigration law favored family reunification, old families petitioning relatives, and professionals such as doctors, dentists, engineers, nurses, other highly educated people. Filipinos were the largest group coming to America each year. One year they found out they weren't considered equal to their white American peers. In the 1970s, several Asian American social workers received funds to research Asian American problems on the West Coast. In 1971, I was hired to conduct the Filipino component. At the same time, I was youth director of the Filipino youth activities, which provided programs and activities for young people. That same year, the FY received its first grant and sponsored the first Young Filipino People's Far West Convention. Emergence was a theme, and young attendees spoke emotionally about their hurt and their hopes for the future. The Filipino Information Resource Center became their dream. It was funded, then in months was unfunded by a new national administration. Now, I worked with the community, had daily gatherings with different groups of recent immigrants. I gathered research concerning their problems, wrote position papers on ways to alleviate them. My research was often conducted by phone since I didn't have an accent. The people I was talking to often expressed racial bias. Police departments, fire stations would say Filipinos are too little to be hired. Some businesses said accents of Filipino bookkeepers was an impediment. The passage of affirmative action laws later enabled the eventual hiring of Asian police and firefighters. Schools with many immigrant children who only spoke their language or just had an accent were often treated unfairly by white ESL teachers. We then formed a multi-Asian group and pushed the Seattle School District to hire teachers who could relate linguistically and culturally to their immigrant students. Although after much pushing back, the district agreed, but we were informed only US citizens or permanent residents could be hired. Many recent immigrants were teachers back home. In 1973, Mitch Matsudaira, the director of the newly formed Washington State Commission on Asian Affairs, worked with state legislators to secure temporary certification for recent immigrant teachers.
Time, Auntie
He
Dorothy.
retired after teaching for over 25 years. Spent many days with doctors, dentists, and others trying to resolve their problems. It was apparent most hospitals in Seattle were unwilling to hire Filipino doctors. I advised them to apply for positions in small towns. And those that did retired, honored, others did not, and soon gave up the profession for which they were hired. There were other battles won and lost. The people I worked with became my friends. Position papers I wrote are now tucked away in the file cabinets in FANHS. I slowly got tired of being angry and frustrated. In 1979, I decided to fight a new battle and submitted a proposal to the National Endowment for the Humanities to research the history of Filipinos and Koreans in America. After 2.5 years with a dedicated staff around the country, funding ended. However, in 1982, in the last project newsletter, I inserted a small note inviting people to join a future Filipino American Historical Society.
That
Thank you,
concludes
Auntie
our
Dorothy.
panel.
Thank you, panel one. Let's give them a hand, huh? I tell you that's a lot of the one thing I think everybody should remember or just notice that back in the heyday they were fighting for our rights. 50 years later, we're still in it. So in other words, these guys were not only the movement, they never left the movement. And so I highly applaud you guys because when they advocated for, people of color to get into professional schools, I was one of them. So I highly thank you for allowing me to become, the first dentist to be at the University of Washington. And thank you, panel one.
Hey,
Panel
Alan,
two.
yeah, one quick thing, one thing before we go to the next panel. Andres wanted to make sure that everyone would be able to click on the bios for the speakers. It's in the Zoom program. They're linked there. So if you want to find out more about the people who are speaking, please click on those links and you'll find a lot more about their history and who they are.
Yes, thank you, Arnell. Thank you, panel one. Panel two is headed by my good dear friend, Ben Manor, whom I met in Seattle, 1971. Here's another man that's not only, helped build the community, he's still building the community. A man that has not left the community. So with that said, Ben Menor.
Well, thank you very much, Alan, and thank you for what you're doing for our community with the Zoom. I also want to thank Mariella, the chair of NaFFAA, as well as Auntie Dorothy for FANHS. Excuse me. It is a privilege to be here today for this timely discussion on civic participation by our Filipino elected officials. My membership in FANHS dates back to 1982, and my membership in NaFFAA dates back to 1997. As such, I am deeply honored to see these two organizations unified on a single stage to strengthen our Filipino community's civic engagement voice. Today, we have the distinct pleasure of welcoming three extraordinary Filipino elected officials. From the heart of the largest Filipino community in the United States, Greater Los Angeles, we have the former mayor Cerritos, Mark Polito. Elected to the city council in 2011 and appointed mayor in 2014, Mayor Mark Polito made history as the first Filipino American to hold a prestigious position in Cerritos, if not in the Los Angeles area. A pioneer in Filipino American civic engagement, Mayor Polito has been a dedicated member of the NaFFAA since 1997 and FANHS since the early 2000s, and has been tirelessly advocating for our community. Our second panelist is Delegate Kelly Converse Fowler, representing District 21 of the state of Virginia. A businesswoman and educator, Delegate Fowler made history in 2017 as the first Filipina and AAPI woman to serve in the Virginia House of Delegates. And finally, we have the esteemed Honorable Attorney Rodel Rodiz, one of the founding members of NaFFAA and its general counsel since 1997, a trailblazer in Filipino American politics. Rodel has served on the San Francisco Community College Board of Trustees for 3 terms and was board president for 6 years. His commitment to public service began in 1987 when he was appointed to the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. Rodel was one of the first board of directors and lifetime member of FANHS. Our distinguished panel will address one of the following questions in 8 minutes. What inspired you to run for public office? 2, as an elected public official, what impact and achievements did you make on behalf of the Filipino community as a legislature? And 3, what singular advice can you offer for the next generation of Filipino elected officials, and especially how the two organizations can help to promote and support our up-and-coming servant leaders? Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in warmly welcoming these distinguished leaders, trailblazers, and public servants. And we'd like to start off with former Mayor Mark Polito.
Thank you very much, Brother Ben. And I'm very honored to join everyone today for this very important conversation, particularly this panel about motivations and the importance of Filipinos and Filipinas running for public office. First, I want to give my love and gratitude to FANHS and to NaFFAA, 2 organizations that are very close to my heart and have been working very hard over the past several decades to empower our community and educate our community and inspire our community towards a greater involvement in America. I'm very honored to be here along with my fellow panelists, the Honorable San Francisco City College trustee, Rodel Rodiz. And it's an honor to be on this panel and to meet virtually the Honorable Virginia Delegate Kelly Converse Fowler. I also wanted to give a special note of gratitude to Auntie Dorothy Cordova for continuing to be an inspiration, not just to me, but to generations of our community to be involved. Brother Ben, thank you for moderating this, and also to Brother Alan Bergano in Virginia Beach, Hampton Roads area for reaching out to me to include me in this panel. With that, I want to say to the question, what inspired me to run for office? Let me say this, that it was the realization that running for public office is in and of itself an organizing opportunity. And as a former youth organizer turned community organizer, and prior to that, being a student activist in college, I grew to understand that every opportunity engaging with our sisters and brothers in the community is in of itself an organizing opportunity. And I really learned this first and foremost from older sisters and brothers at UCLA when I was a troubled teen in the mid 80s. And I really wasn't college bound yet, but it was through an organization called Samahang Pilipino that reached out to me through their Project Prep to encourage me to pursue higher education. And it's because those positive sisters and brothers from that continuing student movement, by this time, the mid 80s, who inspired me to seek higher education, attend UCLA, and get active on campus, and at the same time, concurrently give back to the community in P-Town, Filipino Town, which is today, now the designation is Historic Filipino Town, through an organization called SIPA, Search to Involve Filipino Americans. And I have to give it up to one of the earliest inspirations for me to get involved in the community and to be engaged politically, and that is the late and great beloved Uncle Royal Morales. So to answer that question, what inspired me to run for office, it was several people who were leaders and organizers within our community, within the youth sector, the student sector, campus activism, and segueing into community, grassroots, nonprofit, social service delivery right in our community, where the most vulnerable in our community were there, and the needs were not readily apparent. And we had to go in and we had to really, commit ourselves to understanding the community, educating ourselves, working shoulder to shoulder with the people who are there. And for me, not being raised in Filipino Town, but more in the suburbs of Los Angeles County, my hometown of the past half century, the city of Cerritos, I came to realize that I needed to take all that I learned during my time at UCLA and my time in the community in Los Angeles to bring it back home and to seek public office. And I want to attribute that to two people in particular. And this was in 1993 at the tail end of my term as UCLA student body president. About May 1993, the UCLA Alumni Association was honoring then Lieutenant Governor Benjamin Cayetano. And he was the first person who really planted a seed in me that it was possible to run for public office, and not just for local public office, but all the way to the highest office in the land. This is in 93. And when I was a graduating senior, he challenged me and he said, "What are you going to do with your life?" And I said, I'm not sure. I'm a history major. Maybe I'll be a professor, or maybe I'll get involved in politics. Then he invited me out the next summer. He said, "If you're not busy, then maybe come out and volunteer in my campaign. I'm running for governor." And so he planted that seed in May of 93. And then June 1993, when we had our first Filipino graduation at UCLA, the keynote speaker was my mentor of, up to that point, the past 6 or 7 years of my life. And that was Manong Philip Veracruz, one of the co-founders of the United Farm Workers, an original striker of the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, AFL-CIO. He encouraged all of us as graduates to join the labor movement and to join a brand new organization that got established called APALA, Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, AFL-CIO. But later that night, before he got in the car with my sister and her boyfriend, drove him back home to Bakersfield. He challenged me also, what are you going to do with your life, Mark? And I said, Mono Phil, I'm thinking about serving the community and maybe politics. And he said, well, do whatever you can to go as high and as far as you can go with the love and support of your parents. If you could pursue higher education beyond college, maybe get a master's, then do that. And I said, yeah, I'm looking at public policy. And he said, good. But after you're done with that, make sure you come back home and you run for office. That's what Mono Philip Vera Cruz challenged me. And I didn't realize this, but after a lot of reflection and researching and rereading his book that was jointly published by the UCLA Labor Center and the Asian American Studies Center, I came to understand that the Manongs, Manong Larry, Manong Philip, Manong Bob Armington, Manong Pete Velasco, Manong Andy Umutan, Manong Ben Gines, they didn't stop at just organizing in the labor movement, but they were a part of an organization and a movement called FAPA, Filipino American Political Association. And Manong Larry was the national president, and the president of the Delano chapter was Manong Philip. And I came to understand that they weren't just stopping at just seeking economic justice, social and economic justice. They were interested in full political empowerment. And then I found out, because I never met Manong Larry, he had died in 1977. I found out that in 1966, 1 year into the strike, he ran for Delano City Council. That blew my mind that, he wasn't just focused on trying to win a contract and the right to organize and to write for better wages and working conditions, but he was interested in self-determination for the community right there in Delano as early as 1966. And then later on in 1972, I found out that he had become one of the first, probably the first, delegate to a national convention in Miami when he was a delegate to the Democratic National Convention. And so for me, all of that history from our Manong generation, I'm an Xer, okay? So I'm not a boomer. I missed the glorious period of the civil rights movement, the ethnic study strikes. I stand proudly on the shoulders of those who fought for me through affirmative action to gain a college degree. And so I know that I need to pay it forward for what the Manongs did for me, what those great activists did in the 60s and 70s. So in the 80s and 90s, I made it a point to not just stop at being a student activist, a campus activist, a community organizer, but I decided to come back home and do it the hard way and try and transform my very conservative, and at that point, though very diverse, also very hater, Cerritos. And so I'm proud to have served as my hometown's mayor 2 times, but more importantly, once I got through the door, to hold it open and to encourage other younger sisters and brothers, not just in my town, but in other surrounding hometowns, to seek public office to make a difference for all of our communities. I just want to end with this and say that I have to say we are enjoying what I want to characterize as the golden era of political empowerment. I'm inspired by not just our Virginia delegate who's on this call right now, but I am in full awareness that Brother Stephen Raga is the first state legislator in New York, Erica Mosca, the first Filipina in the state of Nevada, Janelle Cavero, the first in the state of Arizona, Justin Jones in Tennessee, Genevieve Mina in Alaska, and so on, and so on, and so on. And also I have to shout out to my sister, probably the dean of all state legislators, the Honorable Chris Valderrama, the Deputy Majority Leader in the Maryland House of Delegates. So because of them, I'm inspired not to stop at local office. I plan to seek higher office in the California legislature. But right now, I look to my sister, Jessica Coloza, who seeks to be the first Filipina elected to the California Assembly, and my brother, Christopher Cabaldan, who is poised to be the first state senator in the state of California. So I'm excited to be here, and I thank you for having me today.
Wow, thank you, Mayor Mark. Amazing, amazing. We're going to segue, which you did, to our Honorable Delegate Kelly Converse Fowler of the state of Virginia. Delegate Fowler?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Delegate Kelly Converse Fowler, and I represent the 96th district in Virginia. It's in Virginia Beach, located in the western part of Virginia Beach. We're the largest city in the state. We have the biggest population, and we have so many military bases here that is why we have a huge Filipino population in the area. That's what brought me here. So I grew up in Virginia Beach. I went to the same school as my daughters are going to now. So I've been in my district a very long time. Represent the same area that I grew up in with my grandparents in their house mostly. And I went to, I got my master's at Old Dominion University in education, but I got a double major at the Virginia Wesleyan University before that in psychology and criminal justice. So after I got my master's in teaching, I went ahead and started teaching. I taught in Virginia Beach. I taught right in my community. So it was overlaps with my district, same neighborhoods that my kids that I already had known, and now that I represent them. My husband, his name is William David Fowler. He goes by David. He was born in Jacksonville, and military again brought him to Virginia Beach. He doesn't even remember Jacksonville. And we now have 3 children, 3 girls, Tessa, Sophie, and Scarlett. We had later in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic. So everything I heard is so relevant and intriguing in this. So thank you so much for putting this together. I know that I should have said that at first, but I appreciate it so much. I feel like I'm learning a lot. It's very relevant. I wouldn't be here let me tell you first a little about where I am. I am a delegate, and I also am the vice chair of Privileges and Elections Committee, which oversees voting and all the election law in Virginia. So I'm vice chair of that committee. I chair the subcommittee for that on all the gubernatorial appointments go through my subcommittee. And I'm also on some commissions that are really relevant. The Small Business Commission, because I am in real estate. After I taught, I got into real estate and before I became a delegate. And so now I'm on the Small Business Commission and the Minority Business Commission. And so those are very relevant. And I'm also a founding member of the AAPI, the Asian American Pacific Islander Caucus, and that is in Virginia, and now still a member. And we have grown our caucus we actually have 8 AAPI members now in the state of Virginia representing our communities. It's amazing. So how did I get here? I feel like it was so relevant. I wanted to chat the entire time I was listening. My grandfathers, both my step-grandfather and my grandfather, went and came from the Philippines. So they both earned their citizenship through the Navy, and that's what brought them here. Actually California first. I do want to share that if I can get it to zoom in on the little face. I knew I should have sent this to you on ahead of time. I knew it was going to blur out if it didn't see the face. I should have sent it, but it's a picture of my grandfather. He was born outside of Cavite. And my other grandfather, he grew up in the mountains with his mother and survived a lot of things. And now he served his country. He is buried in Arlington. And I'm very, very proud to say that he was the one that pushed the education on me. He was the father figure in my life. My mother and I lived with them as I grew up. And my grandfather was a huge inspiration. Francisco Sacdallan and Abelardo Raymond Ramirez are my grandfather's names. But they both passed. I dearly miss the father figures that I had. They had a huge influence. So becoming an educator and getting all that education was the countless hours that I was told by my grandfather, Papa, that I needed to go to get the most education possible. That's all he pressed upon me. And so it was a given that that's what I was going to do. It's why I double majored. It's why I went into education. Public service was in my heart. And so, I mean, now I have done some really great things in the legislature. Biggest thing I can say about these questions to answer is the biggest thing I've done is a bill a few years ago, and it was HB 2198, and it changed the law. In Virginia, if you have in your locality, you have districts, right? Some localities have districts, some of them have at large, for your city council, for all those important decisions that they make. In Virginia, you could have districts with your representative has to live in each district, but you got voted on by the majority. So no Filipino candidates were winning. I mean, it was federal lawsuits. There are plenty to look up on the matter, but as the federal lawsuit went on, they did have me testify in because of my district and the dynamics and everything that had gone on. I thought of something. I thought, why don't we just have a law that says that you have to vote within your district to be, you can only vote for that person. You can't vote for everyone's person, which makes a lot of sense to everyone to represent your community and not get out. Let's say we all voted for our choice and then the majority decided, no, we decided for you. So we really want our communities to have an option of choice. And I think that's the biggest thing that I would say about these questions that I wanted to talk about. It passed. So it's very good now. We have district voting. So when our communities go up, we have 10 districts, 10 school board districts, 10 city council districts. And every time you vote, you're only voting for your representative. And it makes more sense now. But the things that went on to thwart this, I could talk for an hour. I wish I could. Back to the 2000s, where my predecessor, who also was Filipino, he was the first Filipino representative, and he's actually a Republican and I'm a Democrat, which didn't matter. He fought and advocated for this, and Uncle Ron still looks after me to this day, being in office, to make sure we're both represented. I'm representing the community also, like he did. But see how it was so important to have an option of to be able to choose for yourself and your own community, not the totality. That's the biggest thing I feel like I've done. I felt like when Uncle Bet, when you asked me the question, I kept thinking all these little things I've done for the community, but this actual one issue affected our community so much now that we have people that are looking out and getting our choices are being chosen, whether they're Filipino or not. We still want our community's voice to be heard. And I would say that for the young people, which is my passion, I have 3 children and was an educator. Our community needs you. Like, our community needs you. That's the biggest advice I can give. So again, what the mayor was saying, the honorable was saying was, we need to, have them know he was inspired. He was, told you can do this. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we need to do and pass on. And I see it happening within our community, where the older generation is passing the torch and really showing the next generation. So, and the other piece of advice is to build coalitions like that AAPI caucus that we have. We're a force. We're a voting force within the legislature that is considered when voting takes place. We can switch a voting pattern. So that coalition really exists. We are the fastest growing population in the United States. So just to see the organization happen, and I'm probably over time. I appreciate you all letting me talk. And I just wanted to say, I hope that explains how I am really the product of where I came from. If it wasn't for those who came before me, I wouldn't be here. And I do see it as a give it back. And I do take every vote very seriously, because my district does tend to, the Filipino in my district do tend to lean Republican. So there are votes that are different that I vote for my community on, because that's what I'm there to do. So I hope that helps explain a little more of where I come from. But I really think that we need more representation, and this type of activity and this type of Zoom right here is really amazing. I would love to be able to share it, because I think a lot of people would be interested in hearing all of the perspectives and how relevant they are.
Wow. Thank you, Delegate Kelly. Amazing again. Another great.
Oh, did I still have a minute? Because I had one more thing I wanted to add.
Go ahead.
My grandmother, I didn't mention, my grandmother actually grew up in Bakersfield. I said that in the chat. Well, she's half Mexican, but I grew up with the influence of both. But she would tell me things. She would tell me about when she worked on the field. She took one special grandchild out for a visit when I was 18 to California, and drove me around and showed me the artichoke. There was a big artichoke place. I don't know where it was, but I would love to know the address of that place. It's just a huge artichoke. And now she lived a block and a half away from me. So we still have that. But all of the things that happened with the farm workers unions, I got the perspective because she grew up with her stepfather was Filipino. So it's so interesting to hear all the perspectives. Again, if you do anything more in depth like this, I would love to be a part of it. Sorry to come back.
Okay, wow, thank you very much, Delegate Kelly. As you've noticed, when I selected the three, they represent not only the best of our public officials, but they represent three different generations. Of course, Delegate Kelly is the youngest delegate generation, then Mayor Mark Polito, and now one of the early pioneers of a public official, and the only one elected in San Francisco, is our dear advocate, activist, attorney Rodell Rodiz. Rodell?
Hi, good afternoon.
Gonna unmute, Ben. We can't hear you. Unmute.
All right. Go ahead.
There you go.
Camera.
Get the big cat.
Okay, thanks. There we go. Okay, yeah, I started with the Far West Convention in 71. Later, when FANHS was formed, I was on the Board of Trustees. But my involvement in the community really began when martial law was declared in the Philippines. And in September of 72, we organized opposition all over the US. I was traveling and we were organizing chapters. At that time, I was teaching Philippine history, the history of Filipinos in America at San Francisco State University. So go forward, in 1983, Ninoy Aquino was assassinated in the Philippines. And a year later, we were protesting in front of the Philippine consulate when someone joined us in our picket line, and I recognized him, and it was Assemblyman Art Agnos, San Francisco Assemblyman, and he had his son on his shoulders. And he asked me what we were protesting about, so I explained what happened to Ninoy. And I told him, you know, I'm impressed. There are no reporters, there are no photographers, and you're joining this in your own capacity.
Yeah.
So I told him I was impressed with that. And I told him if he ever ran for mayor, I would be on board. And sure enough, a year later, he announced he was running for mayor, and I signed up. My wife and I became precinct captains. We organized Filipino Americans for Agno, did fundraisers, went door to door. When he was elected mayor, we talked with him and he said, you know, Filipinos in San Francisco have only been appointed to the minor commissions, the Human Rights Commission, Commission on the Status of Women. Not that they were not important, but the major commissions, somehow Filipinos were not included. And we were never getting appointed to those major commissions. Mayor Agnos made a commitment to me, and he appointed me as president of the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, which at that time was the largest commission because it had the Muni, Hetchy, and the Water Department. And that was the beginning of my political career in San Francisco. And in 88, so I was there for 4 years in the Public Utilities Commission. And in 91, there was a vacancy in the Community College Board, and Mayor Agnos appointed me to that vacancy. And I was to run in the November 92 elections. Now, there had been other Filipinos appointed to elected positions, but when they ran, like in the case of two, we know, they lost. So in November of 92, I would be running, and if I won, I would be the first Filipino in San Francisco to be elected to public office. And sure enough, I won in 92, and I won 4 consecutive terms.
Ben's channel is really going overboard, though.
What's that?
Alan, could you mute Alan needs to mute. Oh, okay. So I was elected president of the commission 3 terms, and now one of the interesting things is that when I was in the Public Utilities Commission with the Muni under our wing, we were going to appoint a general manager of Muni, and I asked for his appointment to be deferred. And I talked with him before his appointment would be announced. And I said, do you know how many Filipino Americans are there in management in Muni? And he said, Commissioner, I'm sure there must be a few because there are several hundred Filipino employees. And I said, well, Johnny, there are none. And you have a person under you, Kenny Rodriguez, who's been training all the ones under him, and they get promoted on top of him. So he said, I'm going to change that. And he appointed Kenny, who's the first Filipino American to be in a management position at Muni. When I was placed in the community college board, I was able to get 3 Filipinos out of 45 total administrators, 3 Filipinos, the vice chancellor for academic affairs. We had 3 that out of the 45, which was a major change. We were able to preserve Filipino American studies, which was going to be dissolved. And we were able to get 15 Filipino Americans appointed to various city commissions, the largest so far. 2 of them were in administrative positions. Peter Jamero, whom we hired from Seattle, and Felipe Floresca from New York. So with this, we were able to show our community that getting Filipinos into major commissions or elected positions has an effect of bringing other people in and getting involved in the process. So how much time do I have?
Sunny, how much time left? 2 minutes? 3?
3.
How much time?
3.
What?
3.
Sunny, how much time? 3 minutes?
3 minutes, okay. I want to just share with you, when I was on the community college board, our chair, Edwin Almirol, passed away so suddenly. Now, when he passed away, there was a hiring freeze of all the major positions. There were 43 frozen positions. And then the following year, we were told that we now could appoint 5. So we were lobbying that one of the 5 would be a Filipino American, because with the death of Edwin, we lost 4 teaching positions in our Philippine Studies department. If we don't fill that position, then we will not have the Filipino Studies program that we had. So we lobbied, we were at meetings, we were telling people how the community needs this, our community. And we were, of course, one of the 5, and that was because I was on the board and the chancellor needed my vote on some issues. So that was the situation. I mentioned that because that's part of empowerment, just getting in the room and being able to participate in decisions that affect our community is the reason why we run for office. So unfortunately, we've not had many others run, but all over the Bay Area, Daly City has 5 council members. 4 of them are Filipino Americans. That's major because for the longest time, we could not get anyone elected in Daly City with a 35% Filipino population. So that's the purpose of getting ourselves empowered and placed in elected positions.
Now that's great civic engagement, folks. That's why I left the last for Rodell, because he brings in so much. Okay, I'm going to turn it back to Alan. I think we're done, unless you gave me a few more minutes. This panel of leaders
I mean, beyond exception. They proven that Filipinos are not only great public officials, but they're good legislators. And if they have the power, they will make it happen to help the Filipino community to become a bigger voice and a greater influence to the rest of society. Alan, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, panel two. And just a side note, Kelly Fowler is a warrior. She just had surgery and she said, okay, I can't miss this. I need to be a part of this. So Kelly, thank you for showing up. And now last but not least is our third panel. I'll hand it over to Daniel Griffith.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Daniel Griffith. Welcome to our third panel. We're going to be having a very important conversation here around how we can continue to apply some of the history and lessons that we've been hearing about so far today. A very important topic we have in civic engagement and empowering the future for the next generation of voters. We're going to deviate a little bit from the format that we've had so far. And in order to have a productive and respectful session, I've suggested a framework for discussion for our panelists, which includes using I statements, upholding the nonpartisan spirit of FANHS as an organization, and also building on each other's experiences instead of taking them down. I'm going to say that we need critical conversations such as, the ones we're having right now, even though we have such little time to do it here in half an hour-ish. So I'm going to remind all the participants to keep your words brief and to the point, but also, and importantly, to be in dialogue with each other. Don't be afraid to jump in and bounce off someone else's idea. Just don't interrupt, because being in dialogue for civic engagement is the purpose of us gathering together today. So I'm introducing now our panelists, whose biographies you are able to read on the registration link, which I will post in the chat right now. And then also separately, it appears that Vicky Manugo Greco's bio is still private, so there is a separate link that's public that you'll be able to view right here. All right, so introducing our panelists, we have Vicky Manugo Greco, Larcy Douglas of Common Power, Delano Cordova, Zian Fermisa, Vita Grace Israel Cabanilla, and Tiana Andreessen. And I think everybody is present now here. So I'd like to start off by creating some context for our topic of empowering the future through civic engagement, and hear first from the younger voices in our panel. So let's set the stage for our next generation. It's general election season, and there's hundreds of federal races on the line, as well as many, many more in our home states and counties across the country. There's a lot of uncertainty around all of this, and certainty depending on who you talk to, around these elections. And even if you're not paying a lot of attention to what's going on, it does have an impact on each one of us. And I'm speaking not only of people in power or their policies, but also the effects of what impending change with a capital C has on us. Change for better or change for worse. So turning it over to the younger panelists, we want to know, Tiana, Z, Vita, and Delano, how are you personally approaching this election season? And what are some of your hopes and fears that you're feeling surrounding this impending change? And I'll turn it over to you.
Are they?
I can go ahead and get started. Can you guys hear me clearly? Okay, awesome. I'm in a cafe, so apologies for the background noises. So I'm Zian from Mesa. In terms of like what a lot of young people, I'm currently a college student at Pomona College. So one of my biggest hopes is to literally see an improvement in our education system, obviously making it more accessible and equitable. I believe that a well-informed, educated society is the backbone of a strong democracy. But I also really fear that a lot of young people are witnessing a decline in democratic values, where misinformation, political polarization, and the lack of trust in many institutions are like eroding our democratic foundations and our beliefs within the system. And I think it's very clear, right, to see that within like different educational institutions, from like K to 12, and especially now as a college student, right, like seeing a lot of like different protests and stuff like that on campus. So I think education is something that should be prioritized this coming election, as a young person, and also just elected officials that really value and tapping into like the current generation and our concerns.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that we're going to address, some of those, barriers maybe that we'll address in the next section also. So thanks for bringing that up. I'm going to make it a free-for-all, so go ahead.
Yeah, so hi everybody, my name is Delano. I'm currently at a officer retreat for my student organization here at the University of Washington. And so yeah, so apologies for the background noise, but kind of building off of what Zian said, I do agree that a lot of things relate to education. And one of my biggest fears is a lot of the people I know and a lot of people around me are kind of lazy. I'm not gonna lie. So we get a lot of our information from TikTok, Instagram, right? And
Did we just lose him?
Yeah, his video was going out. So I was,
okay. Well, we'll definitely be able to pick up on that thread several times, because social media is definitely going to be a big kind of focal point of what we're talking about. So I'll make sure to get him in on that when he comes back. So Vida or Tiana, would you like to continue? What are your hopes and fears around this election season?
I'll go. A lot of the work I do is about political literacy and educating other students about how voting works, how our government works. And a lot of the time, I don't see that. A lot of the time, we're not teaching that in schools. So either people don't know enough about how the election works, or people just choose not to vote because they believe their vote does not matter. And I'm going to reassure you right now that your vote does very much matter. And I am 18, not 18, I will be 18 next year. And so a lot of my friends are choosing to abstain from voting this year, which really disappoints me. And so I think that we need to instead stop looking at social media for, political questions, which a lot of us are doing, and start pushing it out a bit more in schools. And I think everything starts at the beginning when you're in school, when you're in elementary school. Now we're becoming adults, and we need to know what we want. Because when you vote and you write on that piece of paper, your whole life is controlled after that for the next 4 years and beyond. I don't know if Tiana wants to go.
I was gonna let Delano finish what he was saying, but
thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, the Wi-Fi isn't the best here. But yeah, I was saying social media, we get a lot of our information from there and it's very easily accessible. So that's why a lot of people favor that rather than looking at the newspaper or looking up articles that they should read from different sides and different parties to get a whole or a more holistic view of politics. So I was saying that like that's one of my worries. It's a lot of people being lazy and not doing their research when they should do their research. Like Vita said, your life will be.
Oh no.
Uh-oh.
Lost you
Gotta
again.
get a
Strike two.
Where's Deanna?
Janice right there.
I'm right here. Sorry. I just wanted Delano to finish. I guess I'll just go ahead since I'm unmuted. I want to actually push back on what y'all were saying in that just when we vote, it doesn't mean that necessarily that our lives are controlled by the people in power because as FANHS has taught me, really community power is what makes things happen. And what our delegate said in the last panel, where they're listening to us. And so honestly, my hopes is that there's a lot more youth speaking up about the issues that are important to us, and really trying to hold our delegates accountable to what the community needs. Because we're not helpless in this. We all have a choice to either try to change things or to, it's a double-edged sword. Thank you. Change things or just let them happen. And so my hope is that with this election season, with all the tensions, with all the politics happening, that those who are in the position of running get listen to youth voice, especially. And also definitely need better education around the issues that are going on. And also maybe more information about how people's positions actually impact different things. I guess another hope of mine is that people tap into local politics too, because I think that's a little bit more immediate for a lot of us in our conditions of living. And also someone's unmuted. Sorry. And also my fears in turn with that is that we don't take this opportunity to step into our collective power and kind of just let all these atrocities that are happening across the world continue on. And atrocities happening in the States too, honestly. So I don't know if Delano's back. I feel bad because he's getting cut off, but hopefully he can come back and share more.
Hey guys.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah. All right.
If you want to take just another minute or two, hopefully you don't cut out again, but
yeah. Third time's the charm. Yeah, just keep it short and sweet. I'm worried that people aren't going to do the research and do their due diligence to learn more about politics and have a holistic view of what's happening and our candidates that are doing everything. So we should know about the people personally. We should know about their policies and what they stand for. So stuff like that. That's my biggest fear.
Yeah, very important. Thank you very much to all four of you. And please, as we continue the discussion, continue to fold those perspectives into it. So let's move on and talk about some of the barriers that voters today face and how importantly we can work to overcome them, because we don't want to just talk about the problems, right? We want to look toward solutions, even if they're very complex and maybe multi-generational efforts. I want to focus on three barriers in particular. One, suppression tactics that are used to deny people a free and fair vote. Two, voter apathy or voter abstention, which I think is increasing, especially among young people, and we've touched on that briefly. And three, the prevalence of misinformation to mislead and disinformation to deceive voters as to what's real and factual. And a reminder again to consider those barriers, but also discuss how you might start to overcome them as well. Z, I'd like to start with you if that's okay. You've said that there are young folks who are refusing to vote this year, maybe due to fatigue, disillusionment, lack of trust, as you just mentioned, maybe more factors. How much of that comes down to personal choice and how much is a systemic issue? And then how might you start to address this among younger voters?
Yes, for sure. I think specifically in my college campus, I go to the Claremont colleges, and I've been hearing a lot of young voters, eligible voters saying they're refusing to vote, or they're, they have different ways in which they're trying to vote for. And I think a lot of people don't understand kind of the impact that institutions and also different organizations have on a lot of these young people's like minds, right? And for example, my research is based on I researched like I interviewed 18 eligible voters, and I was asking them what space were they first politicized in, and it's actually in their educational institution in a Filipino cultural club. And I think now I'm seeing a lot of like folks within like, you know, my college campus, like even the non-political organizations, like just affinity groups, have been trying to like make this effort of, you know, passing out voter registration cards or like having like, you know, like school-wide events that really does encourage like voting. And I think in particular, when I have dialogues with people who are refusing to vote, it is a personal choice at the end of the day. But I think I turn this question to like you all, right? Like how much of this is also, right? Like the system and like the institution itself kind of like preventing people to like make that choice, and like if their choice truly matters. And I think that's something that I still can't really answer, right? Because I think people look at the system itself and like think about, okay, like there are a lot of promises that are not being kept. And so how can we like measure and assure that like these like people who are like, oh, I don't want to vote, like get like persuaded. And I think large part of it is like the communities that they're in, but also like, I don't know, like what do like older folks think about this? Yeah.
Can I jump in, Daniel?
Please. Yes, please.
This is Vicky, and I've served on the local League of Women Voters of Southampton Roads for over a decade, and I have seen a lot of change. I'm sorry, there's an ice cream truck going through my neighborhood right now, but I do want everyone to know that democracy, I know you've heard this before, it's not a spectator sport. And when people say that their vote doesn't count, I ask them, do they live in a perfect neighborhood? Are they happy with their schools? Do they love the fact that they have to pay these school loans? And that's what I do to get them motivated. But I will say that coalition building is also important, because once you have a voice and you're committed to using it to advocate, then join other groups. That is what I've learned in here in Southampton Roads. We have a Hampton Roads Legislative Collaborative Table, which has 30 strong grassroots organizations. And now I've brought it to the city level here in Norfolk with our Norfolk Vision Now community platform. So I don't know if I'm answering the question about how to make people care to vote, but I will say every vote counts, because I'll use the example of nearby Newport News, where a delegate candidate for the House of Delegates ran. She lost by 10 votes, but they did a recount, and this is Shelley Simons in 2017. She basically, they kept on pushing it back and forth until December 27th. They decided to draw the name from the hat. So every single vote counts. You cannot sit home and complain about how much you're paying in taxes, local taxes, how terrible the schools are. Why can't small businesses open so more easily? I don't want to hear the complaints, and I'm trying to keep it as an I statement. So I have all the faith in our younger voters, because you guys are our shared future. If we had allowed 16-year-olds to vote, maybe climate change wouldn't be an issue. Maybe gun violence prevention wouldn't be the top of the top issue, which hasn't been addressed by our federal or state or local lawmakers. So we want you guys to be empowered and know that what you do matters. And if you act like what you do matters, then you will get your friends to the polling places, because so many people have struggled to fight for the right to vote. We are part of the local league here, is part of a coalition to help with voter protection, election protection. We know that there'll be a lot of people standing in line on November 5th if they don't take advantage of early voting. And we think that some people might be harassed. And we are trying to get more volunteers out for nonpartisan polling observers, so that none of those shenanigans are going to prevent people from wanting to use their voice.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. That's a good transition. I'd like to bring you in, Larcy, if that's okay. So coming from you as a professional who equips young voters with knowledge and tools to overcome some of these barriers to voting, how do I, as an average Filipino American, do something to help make sure others can have access to that free and fair vote?
Actually, I just want to take it back a little bit
Okay,
further
please.
than today, right? So on August 6th, 1965, that's when the federal law was passed, and that was the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And I want you guys to just take a few minutes here and just go Google Bloody Sunday, Selma, Alabama. And this particular time in our history, there was a leader, a student leader, and I hope that the young people on this call, a few things have been kind of mentioned throughout this particular summit or workshop that I've been listening to. Is one of two things. The manongs and manongs that are in this call right now were students themselves. So kudos to you all for being trailblazers about social justice and the work that it takes to get this movement a continuous flow, right? And then to the young people that are here, Delano, Tiana, Zian, and Daniel, like, you guys are here because you will take this fight further into the future. And what we're hoping that we're going to be responsible for the rest of us is to show that civics needs to be a lifestyle and not just when you plug in and out during politics, right? So I want to kind of address a little bit some of the comments that are in the chat. Somebody said here that the 26th Amendment was ratified, that it lowered the voting age to 21 to 28 or to 21 to 18. Absolutely, because at the time there was a war that was happening, and so these young folks were going into war and coming back, and they weren't even being able to vote, right? And then so what happened then? It just shows that our Constitution has been amended 27 times, so we can make change. We can impact policy. The one thing I do teach my students is that history doesn't repeat itself, it echoes. Okay, it echoes. And what that means is historical events may not occur in the exact same manner, but the underlying themes and challenges and lessons continue to resonate today, and the potential of it to impact our future. We are living in that echo. So I'm sitting here through the chats here. Third, I completely understand your sentiments about both side isms, right? Because there is a power that we are facing all throughout the systems of our collective America that continue a system of suppression. So when we're talking about mis and disinformation, yeah, social media is a great tool, and it is allowed for real-time events to happen to be able to distribute that information to us. But it's also like how you eat, right? Like the food that we eat, it can also give you energy, but it can also absolutely drain you. And that's what social media and some of the news and mis and disinformation is actually doing to us also. It's what we consume and how we consume it. And then how are we going to redistribute that effort into a messaging system out there. So if I repost something, and is it factual? Am I doing the due diligence to make sure that these are trusted sources across the media spheres, right? So one of the things that I just tell my students is you just, make sure it's a .gov.org or some of these other, middle of the line type of journalism versus opinions when we're looking at how we're consuming these types of information sources. Because in recent times, it has definitely been weaponized to industrialize misinformation because now it's monetized. Now, there are bot farms and troll farms out there that all they're doing is just putting out information just to confuse the heck out of us, right? And so when we're looking at like why is it important to vote? Why is it important to vote? I told my students, look, if you don't do politics, politics is going to do you. Okay, because what that means is if you're not getting involved, and I'll be more than happy to talk to anybody on the side after this, because I teach this stuff. I teach a civics and democracy summer school where students get $1,000 at the end of that curriculum. It's 10 weeks, and students understand by that time of the 10 weeks that like people fought and bled for the right to vote. In 1965, during Bloody Sunday, March 7th, 1965, there were marchers on Selma, Alabama, trying to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge just to go to the state capital of Alabama, which was Montgomery at the time, just to march, to do peaceful demonstrations so that they could have the right to vote. And there are people living to this day that can live to tell that particular story of who died, who didn't make it, who the Klan came after, just so folks can have the right to vote. So you can be impartial about where the politics are going to take us, or you may being independent or Republican or Democrat. But at the end of the day, people definitely have bled and died for our right to vote. And I'm passionate about this because, you know, I have great relationships to civil rights leaders. We have great relationships to civil rights leaders here, Manong Ben, Auntie Dorothy, and everyone else who spoke here. It gave us a pathway to run for office. It gave us a pathway to represent ourselves in a broader political engagement of what this democracy is supposed to be like. So again, I'm sorry, I kind of went into a little bit of a soapbox there. And it's disheartening to me to see, because I go across the country, I travel to swing states, I travel to rural areas to talk to voters. And it's really disheartening to know how indifferent some people feel, because I know the people. I personally know the people. We personally know the people, like the Manong Bens and Auntie Dorothy's, who fought for civil rights. And it is our privilege and also our honor and responsibility and our moral code to at least live up to what they fought for.
Yeah, thank you so much. And so bringing in the others who haven't spoken as much, and I think instead of moving on to the next session about specifically civic engagement and what your vote means to you, I think we're going to fuse the two. So if you want to continue to address why civic engagement is important to you personally and what your vote means in your response, please be sure to do that. Vita, I wanted to ask you, so as you are a current FANHS intern, so bouncing off of what Larcy has just said, when it comes to this civic engagement and voting personally, why does it matter to you to be aware of our community's history and our history as Filipino Americans? I think you're muted. Vita,
As a fifth generation Filipina, and being here right now in the Central District where my family grew up and where I'm from, and having family members like my Auntie Vivian and my dad and other people in my family who are I believe looking back at our history and looking at the present is what's most important to what we need to look at in the future and what issues matter. Right now, we have things like housing. We have things like, how am I going to live as an older adult now when everything seems to be falling apart? Things like affirmative action are being taken away. Other things are being taken away from me as a young person. And I think it's important that we look at things like climate change and other things in the future. And oh my God. Yes. So I think it is important that we look back at our history to see what's most important moving on and into the future.
Ask them what they're concerned about.
Tiana, I would like to move to you if you have something to say.
Yeah, I just hopping off of what Vita was talking about, there's just I think a lot of people have addressed this, that people feel like surprised when young voters say that they don't want to vote. And I think instead of just dismissing that and being like, you don't know what you're talking about, like blah, 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 like really listen to what they're saying, because what Vita is saying is something that and I'm on the older end of the youth spectrum, and this has been something that I've experienced since high school as well. There's a lot of fear about climate change. There's a lot of fear about affirmative action and reproductive rights. There's a lot of fear about where our money is going to, and all the different ways that like maybe the prison complex impacts us, or like where I guess we're like kind of in the midst of wars, you know what I mean? And so it's really scary for us right now. And it takes a lot of vulnerability for a lot of us to admit that. And so just asking older folks to really listen to that. And I think to answer Auntie Dorothy's question about what issues would really help us understand and like really get us to vote. I think one, addressing those issues with very like clear policies, because I think sometimes they can be a little confusing, or people don't know how to read them, or it's a lot of, again, misinformation and whatnot. Having clear policies about those. Also, again, I think until Larcy, you mentioned this, like making civic engagement a practice rather than just zoning in on people during election season. Because a lot of the fear comes up during election season, but then the rest of the year, we get that sense of powerlessness. And I just don't think that's effective for us in general. And so like engaging us constantly and also, again, listening. And I'll keep it there.
Yeah, and I'll add to that really quick, Daniel. And I love that, like, the overall sentiment among youth is just that they do want to get involved. And there's evidence here with Tiana being present, with Delano being present, that they want to be involved. And again, highlighting what the Manongs and Manongs have done in the past is that you guys have inspired us. And you guys have definitely paved the way for us to have some activation in advocacy and politics. The issue a lot of times is a disenfranchisement that occurs. So I was just about to type this to Annabelle's response in chat, is that systems are out there purposely and intentionally put to disenfranchise certain voting blocks. So for example, in the state of Texas, a student cannot use their student ID to register to vote or even vote, but a person with a gun license can. So those systems that are facially neutral laws say, hey, you need an ID, but then who they decide who gets those IDs and what kind of ID, that's a facially neutral law that we just say like, oh, you need an ID. But at the end of the day, it continues to disenfranchise people. So if Tiana, she is a college student, let's say she decides to go to college in Nebraska or a Louisiana, some of those states don't even have being a student as a proper excuse to get an absentee ballot. So she has to go now. If she really wants to vote and are civically engaged, she has to coordinate with mom and dad to be like, hey, can you send me my ballot so I can vote and pop it back in the mail? And then, so there are so many things around voting that we really, really need to revamp. One of the things I want you all to Google after this particular workshop are two laws, the John Lewis Act or the Freedom to Vote Act. And it will address everything everyone is saying in this particular set of chats. It addresses campaign finance laws. It addresses how easy it is to be able to vote. It also addresses all of the ways money is dealt in our politics. And so these are, again, knowledge that we all can share with each other and distribute amongst our communities and our family and friends. Use our social media to be like, hey, did you know about the John Lewis Act? Do you know about the Freedom to Vote Act? Okay, right now they're stalled in the Senate. They passed the House, but they stalled in the Senate. And this is not a partisan statement. This is to say, and it's factual, every single Republican voted no on passing all of the reforms to modernize the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so there are truly systems in place to disenfranchise certain people, and how we need to get activated about these things in our communities is to start local. Politics is a top bottom, or politics is a bottom up effect and not a top down. And so I really like, Tiana, kudos to you. Delano, kudos to you. Daniel, and everyone of the Gen Z population here. You guys are going to take this fight further into the future. So I commend you for that. And we'll be here to mentor you and guide you and to continue to clear some of the pathways and headwinds you guys are going to be able to experience.
Thank you so much. Okay, I think we're pretty much out of time, and for being respectful of everyone's time here in this whole Zoom room. I want to give maybe one, just so everyone has one more chance to talk, 1 or 2 sentences of a closing statement, if you'd like to. Vicky, I think you're muted.
I put in the chat a picture of something that the league, we're not just women, we're men and women, we're voters, future voters, citizens and future citizens. So they have the do's and don'ts of election disinformation in a nice handy card, and it's Spanish on the back. I'd love to get it in Tagalog as well, but please look at that. Spreading disinformation, election disinformation is doing our democracy, it's criminal. So I just want everyone to know that we are defending democracy and empowering voters. And we're joining our forces with all the Black and brown communities here in Hampton Roads and Virginia. So I'm so glad to hear the history on the West Coast, but we're making history here in the on the East Coast. And I hope we can hear from our Midwest friends too, because there's a lot of things going on that's wrong. Thank you.
Zian or Delano, did you have any last words?
Yeah, I just want to say that from my personal experiences, I do notice a lot of animosity towards different views than your own, or like viewing political views that aren't your own as something very foreign and something that shouldn't be accepted. But discussion and looking into these different perspectives is the only way that we are going to learn. And having these conversations with people that aren't exactly like us and don't have the same experiences as us will help us learn more about what's going on in the world that we don't know about, right? There's like something I'm learning about in my classes is something called like what you know that you know, what you know that you don't know, what you don't know that you know, and what you don't know that you don't, right? So that what you don't know is something really hard to look into. So
how do you
just
know it?
talking to people and just getting that information from them is something that is really helpful, especially in politics.
Yeah, and adding on to that, I think that like if there's a person, right, like you don't necessarily agree with, or like a person who seems misinformed or a little bit like on the fence in something, right? Don't antagonize them. I think nowadays, like everyone is quick to antagonize folks who may not be as politicized, right? And I think one thing I've realized is being politicized is definitely a very privileged thing to have. And so I think, yeah, like if you're a person, right, who's definitely politicized and you have your own set of opinions already and you want someone to like join in like the action, right? Like, and they're just curious or they're just like on the fence, like do not antagonize folks. And I think that's just so important, especially in like a very polarized space that we are already at.
All right, anyone else from the panel?
Just
go ahead. Go ahead.
Go
No,
ahead.
Tiana, no, you're way more important than me.
No. We're all important. Just a quick like one liner, I guess, is I guess no matter what we do, just do something, and don't let these things kind of happen to us. And I just want to, especially to the point of what everyone has said on the panel, like no matter if you're voting, or if you're being in the community or you're educating yourself on other perspectives or whatnot, just doing something is probably the most important thing you can do. So thank you for this space. And yeah, go ahead, Auntie.
No, you're good. The last thing I want to say is if our vote didn't matter, why are they trying so hard so that we don't show up to the ballot? Okay, so I just want to say thank you to, again, the elders that are committed to a civic lifestyle, a commitment to advocacy, a commitment to making sure that the Filipino voice does not get shunned away or pushed aside. And for all the people who are brave enough to go into elected office, to be able to represent the people, regardless of their political backgrounds and political ideologies, is that we're trying to find a universal identity of what being Filipino is. And have we been able to identify that? Probably not, because we're also not a monolithic group. What I do admire about this group right now is our absolute determination to persevere through all of their different generational struggles. We see you. And I want to just say to the young folks that are also on this is that we're not alone. We could go to the people that have led the way before us to be like, how did y'all do it? Now we have different tools and we have different challenges. Mis and disinformation is a real thing. And it's a big, big arm of an apparatus out there, making sure we are not as educated as we could be to be able to participate in our democracy. But we have other people to look to be like, how the hell did you guys do it? Help us in a way that we can forge our own path, but that path is not as hard as it used to be. So everyone out there, we're going to go and look at what progress looks like for ourselves and for our community. We are not going back. We are not going back to the same set of struggles that our manongs and manangs did for labor unions and agri work, and all of the ways that we could have benefits to be able to work and live in our democracy. And for the young folks that are also here, including myself, is that let's not use what the struggles were before in vain and completely not at all untapped in a way that we have to acknowledge what was before us. Because so many of you out there before us did so much with so little. And here we are with so much more, and imagine what we could do with that. So I am inspired. I thank you for allowing me to be in this space, to come as who I am. And the rest of you folks out there, like, we're in this together.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, go ahead, Bita. Last word.
I'm gonna end it with, if other young people my age are seeing this, I want to encourage you that your voice does matter. Don't let your age discourage you from being active in your community. Even if you can't vote, there are other options. Being active, activism, other things, being active in your local government is important. And let that voice, not just voting, be an outlet for you. So being out there and sharing your thoughts and not letting what your friends say, what your elders are saying, discourage you from acting on your opinions, because what's important to you does matter. I think that's it.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all the panelists here and community leaders who made this such an interesting discussion. And we're really looking forward to having more and similar conversations about how we can really make our vote count. Just to summarize in 1 minute, and then I'll hand it over for closing. We face a lot of fears and challenges. You know, some of our rights are being taken away. We've heard that young people, some of them don't necessarily know about how the inner functions of our elections work, or sometimes they don't care. And you know, there's information flying in from not only two sides, many sides. And it's sometimes hard to distinguish what's true and what's false. But you know, there's hope today. In this 2-hour session that we just had, I think we've witnessed kind of like just a microcosm of a generational transition, right? Of where the power lies. And I really loved the quote that Larcy gave earlier, that history doesn't always repeat itself, it echoes. So we want to make sure that we're not repeating it, and as as a younger generation, that we're taking up the mantle. And we've talked about ways to move forward in doing that. Spoken about by our panelists here, and also from the Young Turks in the 60s through the 80s. But I think one really important way is that Tiana brought up at the very beginning, is to listen to each other is very important. And like Z said, not to let someone's views counter to your own make you antagonistic toward them. We've heard a lot about today about coalition building from Vicky and Z, and also from Delegate Kelly Fowler, who are talking about that, and also the power of groups and community as very important to strengthen our resolve and our commitment to civic engagement. And also, like Larcy said, to treat civic engagement as a lifestyle and not just something that we come back to every election cycle. It's something that we should all be striving towards, so that we understand what's going on around us, and that we understand our stake in what's happening. So thank you so much. I'm sorry we went a little over on this panel, and now I'll hand it over to Miss Mariella Fletcher of NaFFAA for closing.
Thank you, Daniel. Excellent job.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, good afternoon, everybody. So, as we close this very significant event, my heart is so filled with gratitude and hope, and a deep sense of unity. First, I want to thank FANHS for collaborating with NaFFAA and for their dedication to persevering and amplifying the stories of our community. You have reminded us that we stand on the shoulders of giants who have paved the way for us, to be here today, and I'm deeply grateful for the space you create for our shared history. Today's theme, Your Vote, Our Future, the Filipino American role in shaping America's next chapter, carries a message that is both timely and urgent. We gathered here today because we believe in the power of our collective voice and the impact of every vote. We know that the fate of our community, our country, and even the future of our families depends on how we engage in this critical election. Our community's involvement in the democratic process is not just a right, it is a responsibility. As of today, there are almost 4.5 million Filipino Americans, with nearly 2.1 million registered as of the last election cycle. Imagine the impact if every one of us took responsibility to heart, became informed, and voted with purpose. Since 2022, Asian Americans and Pacific Islander voters under 30 have surged, with over 600 new voters stepping into this role. This is a wave of change, and it's happening right before our eyes. And experts believe that the increase in voter registration can be attributed to a number of factors. One, the increase in the first-generation immigrants who are getting naturalized. Second, the fact that more young US-born Asian Americans have turned 18. And third, more of the Get Out the Vote initiatives targeted to Asian American communities. But the work is not done, and we still have those in our community, our family members, friends, and neighbors who feel that their vote won't make a difference. And I hear that concern, and I understand it. But here's the truth. Every vote matters. In the 2020 presidential election, many key swing states were decided by margins of less than 2%, and Filipino Americans were one of the fastest growing voter groups in those states. Our voice has never been more powerful. And to those of you who feel that your vote won't count, I say this: our democracy was built on the belief that we all have a voice. And when we unite as a community, being educated, informed, and standing together, we can shape the future of this country. So let us take this moment as a call to action. If you've ever questioned the power of your vote, think of it this way. Your voice could be the one that tips the scale. What does that mean? You could be the reason a policy changes. You could be the reason a leader rises, or a future is secured for the next generation. Remember that. For the young and new voters, I know it can be, or it can feel overwhelming. The media is loud. The information can be confusing, and sometimes the voices seem biased. But here's my advice to you. Do your research. Check credible sources and talk to people you trust. Be open to learning. Misinformation thrives when we don't ask questions. You have the power to cut through the noise and make a decision that is truly yours. This is your future at stake. Let no one take that power from you. As we move forward, let's remember that this is not just about one election. It's about building a community that is informed, empowered, and engaged. The decisions we make today will impact generations to come. So whether it's your first time voting or your 15th, I urge you to talk to your friends, your family, and your neighbors. Encourage them to become informed voters. Let's create a ripple effect that strengthens not only our Filipino American community, but the country as a whole. In closing, I want to leave you with one thought. Our ancestors fought for the opportunity to have a voice in this country. Let us honor their legacy by using ours. We are Filipino Americans. We are proud and we are strong. And together we can shape America's next chapter. And thank you all for being here today, for your time, your commitment, and your love for our community. Together we will build a future where every Filipino American is empowered, informed, and heard. To FANHS, thank you again for your partnership and your unwavering dedication to preserving our history and empowering our future. I do have a call to action. Motivate the uninformed and misinformed to become informed voters, then get out the vote and make a difference. If we want a better life, we should participate in American democracy because your vote is our power and our future. Maraming salamat po, and let's continue this journey with hope and unity. Thank you.
Thank you. This concludes our session here. Just want to thank all panelists for sharing your experiences. And thank you to the audience for showing up. I'm going to stop the recording, but I will leave it to open discussion in which Ben Manor volunteered to moderate. So Ben, thank you everybody.